Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2, testing, testing. Let's move this a bit so I can see the chat. Please hit the like button if you are joining. Please comment in the chat. Please comment any comments down below. It really helps fuel the algorithm, and it helps support this channel. If you are a fan of it, I appreciate any support that you can give. This is going to be pretty informal because it was kind of a last minute decision to even go live tonight. I have a lot going on in my life lately with just our living situation is changing, and so it's I appreciate the patience, and I also have a baby, if you are not aware, so I have been dealing with that, but definitely worth it, but definitely a lot of work. So speaking of, this is what keeps me up at night. Check this out. This is my daughter Juliana. It is amazing. I will do a stream about like fatherhood and babies development and everything at some point. It is an incredible thing to witness a child go from knowing basically nothing and learning how to control their own bodies, learning what the world is, and it's just an amazing thing. But yeah, before we talk about Terrence Howard, I'm going to share my daughter learning. So here's my daughter learning ukulele the other day. Yeah, good job, baby. Good job. You're playing the ukulele. You're gonna be better than me in like 2 years. Wow. Good job, baby. Rocking out. Yeah. Isn't that amazing that she like understands like the concept of like hitting the strings, like, and it's this, she's like not even 6 months. It's or she wasn't in that video, but it is it's an amazing thing to witness, but they keep you up at night. So please comment in the chat. Hello, Paulina, and anybody else, please hit the like button. We're going to talk about Terrence Howard tonight, and how his recent appearance on Joe Rogan has caused an enormous stir in the scientific community, and it seems to have divided the internet. And I don't think that it should divide the internet. I don't really understand exactly why. I'm trying to understand it, but I kind of want to talk about it. I want your opinions on like why you think maybe this is blowing up if you've been following it. I will have to say I've only watched clips of it, so we're only going to talk about little bits that I've seen in clips. We're not going to talk about the entire thing, but there are some things that he said that are, I think, are very relevant to just my own journey with coming from outside of academia and kind of trying to, I don't know if trying is the right word, but like, I guess now trying to, break into sharing some of what I believe are more novel ideas with the scientific world, without, having the traditional background. And it definitely seems like he is also one of those people that, he sees something, he's very passionate about it, and he seems very intelligent. And I'm not saying that he's correct about everything, because nobody's correct about everything. Everybody's wrong about some things. I'm wrong about some things, you're wrong about some things, Terrence Howard is wrong about some things, but also everybody's right about some things too. I think that's important to remember. But I've seen some, scientists and professors out there that have been seem very threatened almost by the fact that Terrence Howard went on Joe Rogan and shared these things, and I want to talk about like some of the reactions that I've seen, because I've seen a couple people say that this is like dangerous, essentially, for people like Terrence Howard to be sharing their ideas about the periodic table and anything else, physics, math. I don't. We're going to get into a bit of what he has said, but I want to first focus on like what the reaction has been and why it's so unfounded. And I will say, I saw Kurchai Mungol said this on Twitter. He said he responded to some people that were upset that people are talking about Terrence Howard in the scientific world, in the rigorous scientific world, and he said, "Don't worry, it's all going to be okay." Perfect response, because that's true. None of this is going to change the outcome of humanity. And not saying it doesn't have an impact. I'm just saying it's not going to change the outcome in the end. Everything's going to be okay. And so it is odd, though, to see some people say that this is dangerous, particularly in the academic space. And it makes me wonder about what they think is dangerous. And I don't really know if they've even considered what they think is dangerous, but it's definitely invoking some kind of visceral feeling in them. And but it's like, if Terrence Howard goes on Joe Rogan and shares all these kind of, I don't want to use the E word, esoteric sounding concepts, and none of it leads anywhere, then so what? That wasn't dangerous. But sharing physics ideas, if you think that you're doing real physics, that is dangerous. It's not going to not change the fact that we're all going to be okay, or that humanity is going to be okay. That is true. We're going to be okay. But physics is dangerous, and this is one thing that I've seen a lot in the academic space, is that and it's kind of mirrors a lot of the more, for lack of a better term, kind of new age narratives as well, is that a lot of it seems to line up with a lot of things that are true, and self-evidently, or even mathematically, but none of it seems to matter at all. And I've talked about this before, but there was a guy on YouTube many years ago, and I watched it many years ago, and he gave his presentation, I think, on a TED Talk, I think, on his idea for his theory of everything. He was a physicist and gives his presentation, and at the end he goes, "So what does this mean for us?" Nothing. Means nothing. Doesn't matter. And that was like the end of his presentation. If that's the reality of your proposal, you're not doing physics. Physics is about physical impact. That is what it is about. It is about physical impact. If it's not about physical impact, then it's not physics. And so if your theory doesn't seem to, or if you don't have any explicit, specific predictions about the implications of your theory, then that would be physically impactful, then you're not actually doing physics. And maybe Terrence Howard, with, and I've seen clips that he's got all these ideas about how to, and we'll show some of it, but make a more efficient computer chip and things like that. And there isn't there's some, it seems to be, I'm not an electrical engineer, but there seems to be some truth to some of the things that he was saying that might, be relevant. But at least he's making claims about like applications of concepts, even if they're wrong. He's making physical claims about physical applications. For some reason, that sounds weird, but that is a physics proposal, at least. If your proposal is just how many dimensions there would be, but we don't know what these dimensions even are, maybe they're really small or something like that, that's not physics proposal necessarily. I mean, I don't think so. And so I don't think we really realize what it means to be serious anymore. I think we just think that it means, being credentialed. But a lot of times, I see that there is also there. I will say this: there is absolutely inherent value in rigor, and that is missing from a lot of people who come from the outside, and I know that, and I'm sure that people think that of things that I've said, and but rigor. I mean, I guess if we were to define it, it would be like, I mean, probably just the dictionary definition of rigor, but I'm trying to think of like what it would inherently mean, in the context that we're discussing. But it, 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 rigor is inherently important. It's important to be checking yourself. It's important to connect your work with the work of others. It's important to not. It's important to build, to rigorously build. That's what I'll say, and not just completely knock down everything that's been done, because that's not helpful either. But I think that there is like an assumption of a lack of rigor with a lot of people who come from more what would be often described as like a new age culture of scientific culture. And I'm just saying that because I don't have a better term, but you know what I'm talking about. And but I think that it's also possible that people who share a lot of the common ideas with that community can also be rigorous. So maybe, we got to give people their due. But I think that when you look at like, why is it more dangerous? Why is it not dangerous to share ideas about string theory, but it is dangerous to share ideas about, from Terrence Howard, just because he doesn't have a PhD? I mean, obviously this has to do with like academia feeling threatened much more so than it does about physics dangers. But physics dangers are the real things that we should be, thinking about, I think, much more so than like the danger of undermining a stagnant physics department. But like I said, there's rigor is important, but we got to allow for new ideas. So we're going to get into some of the things that he said. Like I said, please hit the like button. Please comment anything that you would like to discuss. I probably will keep this one kind of short. It was kind of last minute, and but I think that it was important to kind of get into this because he did say some things that are like seem very relevant to even my work. So one of the things that at least heard was said, and I don't have the clip linked, so I'm not going to play any clip for this, but just to get us started a bit, is there was a lot of things discussed about like changing the definitions of certain mathematical operations and also the concept of zero. And I remember seeing that he had said there was no something like there was no zero. And this is something that I've also gotten into in my very early videos, and I will link to them below after the end of the stream probably, but they just know that if you go look at them, it's been years of developing language since putting those videos out. So there's quite a bit of things that I would change about what I said, but let's look at this basically. Get started. Just a quick clip.
Oh, it's a great point. So new.
This is to get us started. This clip, if you're familiar with my work at all, sentient singularity theory is built on the idea that there are four primary perspectives. And those primary perspectives are inside, outside, separate, and oneness. These are four co-defining perspectives that allow for orientation within relationships that transcend relativity. So not faster than, bigger than, smaller than, brighter than, stronger than, but just still in a relationship of multiplicity, but being able to allow you to orient within that. So you can be inside of or outside of or separate from or one with, and that helps you orient. So I can say I am, my cells are inside of me, I am separate from you, and I'm outside of, I don't know, my dog. Like, and it just helps you orient and in relationships. But let's look at this. This is a clip by Terrence Howard.
Remember, there are no two-dimensional spaces because in order for anything to be perceived, it has to be measurable. And measurable needs 3 dimensions, but it actually needs 4. It needs your perspective. You are the 4th dimension. And that's what Walter Russell also talked about, that it was 4 things coming together. And that's what woke me back up. And I was like 4 bubbles meeting. But he still believed in the idea of straight lines. He was still hemmed in by it. 4 things coming together. Perspective. You are the 4th dimension. And that's what Walter Russell also talked about, that it was 4 things coming together. And that's what woke me back up. And I was like 4 bubbles meeting. To be perceived. It has to be measurable. And measurable needs 3 dimensions, but it actually needs 4. It needs your perspective. You are the 4th dimension.
Very interesting that he said that to perceive you need 4 dimensions. This is very apparently true everywhere that we look. And this is what I want to get into to start is I cannot claim to understand Terrence Howard. And so I'm not going to exactly, but I'm just going to comment on common patterns that I've seen in some things that he's saying and others, and some things that I've seen. And that is it is my belief that Terrence Howard does see pattern that is persistent across fields, and he's trying to describe that pattern, and he doesn't have the specific linguistic framework in order to do so. And so people were commenting on Twitter that, notable scientists were commenting that Terrence Howard might be suffering from some, mental breakdown or something. And I don't think that that's true at all. It doesn't seem that way, at least to me. It seems like he's trying to describe something and we don't have the linguistic framework currently to describe it. And this has been something that I have become intimately familiar with, is that when you are trying to make progress on new concepts that require new context in order to be described and contextualized, you're very restricted because you are restricted to using old language for new concepts. And that doesn't really work. And this is why what I've even noticed with my own work, and especially my older videos, is when I'm talking about the idea that there is no zero. And then I was saying that zero is infinity, and like there's a lot of like things in there that I'm not going to say are false, but I think that there's context that needs to be added with that. But and maybe the language needs to be changed from what I was originally trying to describe, because when you say things like 1 times 1 is equal to 2, which is something that he said, or that there is no zero, you have to give the context to explain what you're actually trying to state. And so as I'm probably doing a terrible job with this. Again, I'm gonna blame it on absolutely lack of sleep. But this as I've said on here many times before, context is information. If you're not giving context, you're not actually conveying anything. So you hear people say, reality is information. Reality is energy. Reality is matter. Reality is time. Reality is space. Reality is frequency. Reality is vibration. Reality is strings. Reality is ideas. All of these things mean almost nothing outside of them being stated within a specific context. If somebody says to you, reality is computation, what does that even mean? That it's that causation exists? That's basically what you're saying, and we don't need anybody to say that. But there's this constant like dance in physics of like, no, reality is information, now it's energy, now it's computation at its core, now it's time. Time is fundamental. Lee Cronin said this, says this a lot. Time is fundamental. Fundamental to what? Maybe to space, maybe not. Maybe it's not completely fundamental, but it might be more fundamental, but you can't say these things outside of context. It doesn't convey anything because context is information. It's not just words. Words outside of context mean nothing. And I think that's what is the biggest hindrance with people who are trying to describe something new while using words that currently exist to describe things that are not new. And is you have to have the context of what of everything that they're talking about. You have to know my work to know exactly what I'm saying. It's interesting because when I first wrote my paper, started writing my paper, the abstract, which if you go to sentientsingularity.com, it's linked down below, you can see. I was asking people like to read it. It's just the abstract, and I was like, can you explain to me what I'm saying? And I asked all kinds of people with all kinds of backgrounds. And I revised it and revised it and revised it until I was able to get everybody who I gave it to be like, okay, yeah, that's actually now finally makes sense. And I didn't realize that the word singularity was making everybody get hung up because they're associating with black holes and what they've heard about black holes, really not with actually anything about black holes that they really understand, but just like what they've heard. A singularity is a black hole. Or a singularity at the beginning of the Big Bang, and I wasn't using it like that. I was using it for its very, like, exact definition of the word singularity, like meaning something that is especially unique and something that is singular, like one thing. That's all I was using it as. It's some people who had more rigorous, I guess more trained backgrounds in physics said to me that I was hijacking the word. And I'm like, no, you hijacked the word. Like to say no, singularity is a black hole or it's the beginning of the Big Bang. No, that's not really what it was. A singularity, the word singularity means something that is especially unique and something that is singular, and it was then taken by physicists and used to describe something that as like a placeholder structure for something that they don't even know what it is. And so, but then so they were getting hung up on that. And then people who didn't have backgrounds in physics or anything like that, they associated it with meaning black holes though. And so they thought I was talking about like sentient black holes and stuff, and they were just really confused. And eventually I had to just write out the definition of sentient and singularity and how I was using it in my abstract. And then as soon as people read it after I included the definition, everybody was like, oh yeah, actually this is super easy. This makes perfect sense. It's like context matters. It's not just words. And it's very hard to grasp the context of somebody's thoughts just by watching a single stream of them, even if it's 3 hours. Or a single clip. And so I'm not going to claim to understand Terrence Howard's everything that he's saying, but I'm just claiming the guy is saying things that it's not that outside the realm of what I think is pretty obvious in certain respects. I'm not saying like, he got into some things have a bisexual tone and he got into just a lot of things that I didn't understand what he was saying, and I'm not gonna lie. But he also said things like you need 4 perspectives or 4 dimensions to have a perspective, essentially. And that makes sense. I mean, look at even physics. There's 4 fundamental forces, and look at orientation and north, south, east, and west, and look at sentient singularity theory, inside, outside, separate, and oneness. You can see this is very common. And but what's interesting to me is that there is no recognition, and this is not a new thing for me to realize, but it's just still frustrating every time I realize it, is that there's very little recognition by many scientists in academia of the fact that there is a common pattern to reality. And that's all that people like Terrence Howard and a lot of people in the New Age community have, who come from a more new age. I'm just using the term New Age community. I don't know what else to describe it as. Definitely see. And also, I think people who make major breakthroughs in science also see. I mean, Eric Weinstein talks about this. He talks about, the dimensions of taste on your tongue and how it corresponds to physics and music. And you hear Terrence Howard and many other people talking about how music and the patterns of music are very common to also the periodic table and would be. And I don't understand why this isn't taken as like this is going to be an inevitability. This is inevitably going to be true. But I think that it's kind of it's almost like a test of like, does somebody see the context of these things that they talk about, or do they just see the words? And if they don't see that there is a common pattern, I don't think that they're capable of moving forward in actually like a rigorous scientific discussion, honestly. They can talk about things that are known, but they can't talk about things that actually could be with any kind of actual rigor and actual context. That's what rigor, I would say, is most related to, is contextualization. And if it is, in its most important definition, I would like to look up the definition of the word rigor. I mean, rigorous, meticulous, conscientiousness, careful, diligent, attentive, strict, severe, stern. I would say contextualizing, but if that would be like, I think, how I would most define it, as in term, like fundamentally define something being rigorous is like if it's, or a your some type of scientific pursuit being rigorous, as being like you're trying to contextualize it and contextualize other things within it and back it up with context. So let's see the chat. I saw the interview, and yeah, of course, saying that is dangerous is super exaggerated. I've liked much more your ideas than what exposed, much more landed for me, at least. I appreciate that. And this is what I've really tried to be good at, and I will admit, the last 2 streams, guys, I feel like I failed a bit, but I'm human, is I'm trying to be good at, like, especially good at choosing my words carefully and actually trying to communicate what is in my head, not just say it and have me understand it, but think about how other people will understand it. And but I also think that this comes with like the wisdom that you get when you try and describe new things with old language, and you realize that this is like very hard. And until you try and do that, how would you even know that this is like a major constraint? You literally wouldn't. You would be so able to just operate and navigate within the confines of what is currently already constructed without any kind of serious hindrances in your ability to convey your ideas, but also to feel like your ideas are being conveyed, which is, that's 2 different kind of things. Whereas, like, if you're trying to describe something new with old language, you are going to have both of those as a problem. The moth. And I've definitely run up against that. So I understand. And this is a clip of, I've had Robert Edward Grant on my stream before, and Robert Edward Grant is somebody who also talks about the common patterns across fields, and the guy is extremely rigorous. Like, that is absolutely true. And like I said, everybody's right about about some things. Everybody's wrong about some things. Not going to endorse anybody wholeheartedly. I like Robert Edward Grant personally, and I also just know that he's mathematically more rigorous than I can keep up with, and but there's a video on his YouTube channel, but I did do an interview of him. You can see. Okay, so basically what we've got here is he's relating the periodic table to music, and we see this with Terrence Howard as well. So when he says things like wait a minute, this right here,
Lie, a log.
What's the solution to that?
The solution is learning how to multiply volumetric.
here. Let's see.
So long.
He was talking about octaves, things moving up in octaves, and then he got to talking about multiplication, and this is what and I'm definitely jumping around a bit, but that's all right. It's an informal live, guys. I hope you're entertained at least. But I'll say this. This is what's going on lately. When you have a baby, they're not supposed to sleep on their stomach in the beginning because they cannot breathe and they can suffocate. And at a certain point, babies get the strength to roll themselves around. And so at night, our daughter is now rolling herself onto her back, onto her stomach, onto her back, onto her stomach. And all night long, I wake up and I just go and I just check to make sure she's still breathing constantly. Because I wake up and she's just like face down like this, like in the passed out in the crib. And it's terrifying in the first like couple weeks that it starts happening. But I mean, it is also impressive that like to see them learn how to like even think about this, like you know, learning how to sleep. Like you have to learn how to sleep, how to turn your head like this when you sleep, instead of just like, face into the mattress. Like you have to learn that, and she's doing that right now, and so she's doing great, but it's absolutely terrifying. It's keeping me up at night, and it's making me exhausted. But getting past it, I'm like my anxiety's going down a little bit as I see her competent. Literally, I'll sit there and I just watch her like an hour, and I see her like roll under her face, and then she's like starts moving, and I like wait to see. I'll be like counting. I'll be like, gonna count 30 seconds before I go over there and like lift your head up and see if you can do it yourself. And she's doing it, but it is anxiety inducing. But Anyways, I digress. But when Terrence Howard, as I was saying earlier, he's talking about like these common patterns and he's relating them to music. It's very hard. I can definitely see this, and I see the patterns that I can see that are in music, the same quantities that come up constantly, also in my work. Problem is, I'm not musically talented at all, and my daughter seems to be much on a much quicker track to learning how to play music well, as I showed at the beginning of the stream, than I am. I didn't start even playing one song on the ukulele until I was like 30 something, and she's already getting it. But it's tough for me to relate this to music and be in a competent fashion because I'm not musically competent, just not. But I'm working on it. But it is inevitable that we will see common patterns, especially if you realize that this is all coming from the structure of mind. You're going to see common patterns in the elements. You're going to see common patterns in music. You're going to see common patterns in color, and you're going to see common patterns in mathematics. And as I've showed on here before, when it comes to just common patterns. Right here. Gosh, I probably not doing myself much justice as far as sounding that confident in this stream, but that's all right. But here, this you can see here. This is something I've shown before. It's kind of binary triadic pattern that occurs everywhere that we look, and you can see it in the order of operations in mathematics. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. You can see it in the fermions and the leptons. You can see it in space-time. You can see it in our senses, and you can see it in questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. You can see it in colors, the primary and secondary colors. You can see it in additive color mixing, like additive versus subtractive color mixing. So you can see like red, blue, green in a screen versus magenta, cyan, and yellow in printing. You can see it in, 6 fundamental solids. The sphere is usually left out of the, I think the Pythagorean solids, I think they're called. But sphere would be included, I think. And you can see it in limbs, arms, hands, feet, fingers, legs, feet, toes. So there's a common pattern all over the place. And this isn't the only one. There's multiple patterns that are, that transcend fields because they are coming from the pattern of mind. And people that see this are very quickly dismissed by the establishment, like I said, because those people don't see context, they see language. So they say things like, you can't say that who, what, where, when, why, and how is anything like parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. They're clearly different things. Well, yeah, if you're just looking at the words, they're different words. But if you look at the context of them in relationship with each other, and you look at how this pattern occurs in other places as well, and you know the context of where this pattern even comes from, which, that I think is a hold up, but I think my work has a lot to add to that discussion, then you can see that there is a commonality and there's validity to the idea that these are, there's a common pattern. But it's not enough to just identify that. Now, what do we do with that information? But so he started talking about math. And he said, like I said, 0 doesn't exist. And that 1 times 1 is equal to 2. And this got everybody in, an uproar. And there's lots of things to get into with this that I'm not going to tonight, but I'm going to get into a little bit because, for one, think that I can actually explain this on a good day, at least, more concisely than most, which is that when it comes to fundamental reality, truly fundamental reality, there is no such thing as zero. Zero meaning an empty set, meaning there is the absence. There is no such thing as absence of fundamental reality, because existence, by definition, is all that exists, and non-existence, by definition, is non-existent, which means there's no such thing as that which is non-existent, which means there's no such thing as zero, as an empty set, as a placeholder of absence. And it's interesting when you try and divide by zero on a calculator, you get an error message. It's been a while since I've done this, but 1 divided by 0 equals error. And I said before that, like, in a previous video, old video, that 0 is fundamentally, if it's equal to anything, what it is equal to is infinity. And like, this is tough because now 0 has two meanings depending on the context. On a fundamental context, 0 is equal to infinity. Infinity is not a specific number, it is an action of growth, of multiplicity, infinitely growing quantity. That's what infinity is. From the start, going forward. It's not this. It doesn't make sense in the. Infinity does not even make sense as a concept in the context of our traditional mathematics. If you have a number line and you've got negative numbers and you've got positive numbers and 0 is in the middle, and you talk about infinity going backwards, infinity going forwards, you add it all up, no matter what, it's going to cancel out. And it equals what? 0. That doesn't make any sense, actually. And this is why when you see people go on Lex Friedman and he's like, what is infinity? Can we really conceptualize it? Infinity is very easy to conceptualize, but in the right context, it starts from 1, goes up. Fundamental quantities do not include negative quantities or 0. They include 1 going up. That's it. And this is kind of different from practical mathematics, which is what we currently have. We have math as a language right now, and as a tool, which is basically the same thing. A language and a tool are the same thing. But when we're going to talk about math or numbers, more specifically, as not a tool not a language, but as an fundamentally existent structure, you cannot have 0. You cannot have negative numbers. There's not even positive numbers. It's just 1 and then groups of 1, quantities. And so you can say in relativity, you can say, how many apples are in my fridge? I have 0 apples in my fridge. Okay, that makes sense. But you can't say I have 0 existences. But this sounds so esoteric, to use the term that we're not supposed to use, the E word, and also useless, that it's listened to, and it kind of intuitively makes sense, and you feel it, and you're like, okay, yeah, I get it, makes sense, and then it just goes by you, and that's it, and it's never thought of again. And that's because we don't think about what existence is when we say existences. What is an existence? And sentient singularity theory, I think, adds the context that allows for this to be understood. And this leads to a lot of weird math that that probably should require new terms, but is being used but people are using currently existing terms, myself included, to try and describe these concepts still, and it's causing problems. So now we're going to watch this clip that of him talking about calculation.
For so long. Because
And what's the solution to that?
the solution is learning how to multiply volumetrically, how the universe multiplies. And I've already produced all of these things.
Could you explain that though to the layperson? How does the universe multiply volumetrically as opposed to the way?
It does not move, does it linearly. It does not walk on. All of our math is based upon a two-dimensional projection. What they do in calculus, they will reduce the action of all things. They'll keep trying to reduce it down to one moment because they believe Newton's first law that everything moves in a straight line, or everything is still until acted upon. They forget that everything is in motion, and that concert of motion is a necessity. They have to include all the other forces involved in order to have equanimity in their equations.
And so how, in a practical sense, does this affect mathematics?
Well, once we let go of Cartesian space and the 90-degree angles, well, picture this. Let's take another practical place. Look at a computer chip. It has all of these 90-degree turns on it, typically, where they run the electricity. Can you imagine running at 186,624 miles a second in one direction, and you hit a wall, and you've got to stop, bounce off of that wall, and then you pick up your speed and you bounce off the next wall, and you bounce off the next and the next and the next and the next. How much heat are you building up? How much friction is being...
Okay, I let it go on a bit because what I want to show is that, like I said earlier, he's making a physics statement, a physical application statement, when he's talking about, like, we can make new, computer chips that don't have right angles in the wiring, and it would be more efficient. Maybe. I'm not an electrical engineer, but that seems to make intuitive sense to me. Maybe I'm wrong, but seems kind of like it would make sense how he described it. But that's a physics theory, in a way. I'm not saying it's a what people call theory of everything or whatever, but it's a theory that has physical application, unlike what I've seen from a lot of like string theory, at least. And I'm not even saying that's wrong either. I'm just saying, like, context is key here. But when he's talking about calculating volumetrically, and from what I had seen in clips, he had said things like that 1 times 1 is equal to 2. What's very interesting here is that when I first, in my models, if you're familiar with my work, I have this model. It is called a quantum of consciousness. It's a model. Here's the terms. Here's the definitions of those terms. Here is the actual numerical representations of this. And this is a calculative model. So you can see if I put 1 here, all these numbers change, and all these numbers change, and all these numbers change. What this is, it's basically like, it's not even just a calculation. It's a formation of information to the point of self-reflection. That's what it is. It's a formation of information. It's interesting. I never have said that before, but that's pretty good. And I gotta write that down. So what's interesting about this is what it's doing is it's adding as you go to the side, and it's multiplying as you go up simultaneously. And when people say things like 1 times 1 is equal to 2, I ran into an issue when I was trying to build this model years ago to show the concept that was in my head. I had to use a cheat. Okay? And that cheat is that when you're getting this value, here, 1 times 1 time, 1 here, 1, it's here. You can see this is all multiplying, but the cheat is here, where and there's multiple ways to do the cheat. Because I'm saying it's a cheat, I'm not saying it's not a cheat. I'm saying it's a cheat, and there's multiple ways to do the cheat as long as it's getting the right information included. Where basically you have to, no matter what, you have to add the information generated. This is really hard to say. Because this and this are happening at the same time as a single action, but must be represented in two different instances here, you can't really show that one of them is... Okay. Oh, man. When you're looking at the Fibonacci sequence... Let's go to the Fibonacci sequence. Oh, man. This is like... I'm going to have to do like a much more concise video on this, but that's all right. Spin sequence. Okay. When you look at the Fibonacci sequence, you have to, in order to kick off the pattern or the sequence, you have to add 1 to 1 to get 2. You can't just start with 1, 1. Okay? You have to basically cheat and have 2 1s, even though it starts with 1. But you're basically adding this one to itself. And so you're multiplying this and adding it. You're multiplying 1 times 1, and that 1 times 1 gets 1, and then you're also, but it's a new 1, and you're adding that new 1 to the old 1, and now you get 2. Okay, so basically that's what's happening. So you've got 1 times 1, but there's this, but because of this happening on like a, he used the word volumetrically, but it's like fundamental, on a fundamental quantitative level. You've got this action taking place where it's like a cell, and a cell, it divides itself in order to multiply, and you end up adding a new cell to the old cell. So what you've got is like 1 times 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. And it's like this simultaneous formation. I don't even want to call it it's a calculative formation, basically. We don't, like I said, we don't have the right terms for this yet. That's why it seems like it makes no sense. And I don't claim to have the right terms for this yet. But I wrote down the other day when I was listening to this to Terrence Howard, I was like, maybe we say something like, instead of 1 times 1 is equal to 2, we say 1 grow 1 is equal to 2. And 1 grow 1 is like this action that I'm talking about, where it's this simultaneous multiplication and addition type of action. And the reason why you can't use old terms for this very much is because outside of the context that people would have to know that you're discussing this within, it's not going to make any sense to anybody. You're going to say 1 times 1 is equal to 2. That doesn't make any sense. Kurt Jang-Mongol said this on his breakdown, which I highly suggest watching, where he had Lee Cronin on and they went through Terrence Howard's discussion with Joe Rogan, and kind of Lee Cronin gave from the perspective of somebody who's breaking boundaries and transcending fields, but also and seeing cross-field patterns, but also is working within the confines of academia in a very rigorous way, is giving his kind of like take on what Terrence Howard is saying. They're basically doing like what I'm doing now. And it was very good. But Kurt said that you can't just change, one thing in the system, basically, if I'm understanding him correctly, because that is something else is built on that, and something else is built on that, something else is built on that. So if you change the definition of multiplication, the action of multiplication, it's going to change. It's all these other things. You can't just like restrict it. And same thing with 0. You can't just change the definition of 0 because now all of a sudden it just changes how we think of it in different contexts that currently are working. So, and like I said, I'm guilty of this, and I'm struggling right now and in the past, probably more so than I realized, to describe these ideas in words that are old. And that's why I said maybe we say, instead of 1 times 1 is equal to 2, if I'm right about what's happening with this kind of like fundamental growth of information, which is any fundamental growth of existence, is the fundamental growth of existences, and that is basically the fundamental growth of like sentience. But for another time. But we say something different, like 1 grow 1 is equal to 2, and then we don't have to deal with these issues. What if, and instead of saying 0 doesn't exist, just saying non-existence doesn't exist. And so in fundamental metamathematics, you can't use 0 to represent an empty set, because it doesn't work. But that means that we also need like a symbolic placeholder for infinity. Maybe you just use the infinity sign. So maybe we need a new calculator that does simultaneous actions and kind of has like an infinity sign on it. I mean, the answer is always going to be infinity, though. 2 divided by infinity is infinity. 1 divided by infinity is infinity. 1 times infinity is infinity. 2 times infinity is infinity. It's not a number, infinity. It's just a concept of infinite growth of quantity, starting from 1 going up. And so, I mean, I'm not saying it's really necessary to have on a calculator, but like it could work. And in the past, I have video that, one of the first videos on this channel where I said, on a fundamental level, 1 divided by 0 is infinity. 1 times 0 is equal to infinity, because I'm using the term 0 to represent infinity, because I said, okay, well, 0 is, if you take all positive numbers and all negative numbers and you add them all together, that's infinity, right? But it's not really, it's like a trick. Some people accuse me of like that's a mathematical trick, and at first I'm like, well, it's not really. I mean, is it not correct? And it kind of is correct, but it's also kind of a trick, and because it's not helpful. Whereas like infinity can be grasped very easily as on a fundamental level as growth of quantity, starting from 1 going up. And there is no infinite negative, really, in actuality. There's like, you could say conceptually, there's infinite negative numbers, and we'll do a whole stream on numbers eventually. But it's like, we'll go through real numbers and imaginary numbers and complex numbers, and we'll talk about like just the current state of things. But it's we need new terms, regardless of whether or not Terrence Howard is right or wrong about any of this stuff. And it's interesting because he said the bisexuality, he used the term bisexual to describe like some type of element, I think. And and I'm not going to say I understood what he was getting at, because I don't, but I will say that I have stated on here that gender is something that it is a pattern it is a symmetry pattern. It's an active symmetry pattern in the universe that transcends multiple levels. And so it's not that crazy to say something like what he said, even if it's not specific enough to actually be as useful as it could be to actually be more precise. But I've said on here that like the neutron is the feminine gender of the hadrons, and the proton is the masculine gender of the hadrons, just like male and female on the biological level. You have proton and neutron on the hadronic level, the atomic level, and they form the nucleus of an atom, and we form the nuclear family, and it's the same exact pattern. But so to say that there's gender in these should be taken more seriously. It's not, but it needs to be, because it's true. Feminine means reactive. Masculine means active. And it is relational. So like, I am feminine in relationship with God, but I am masculine in relationship with my wife. And that dynamic exists. But then there's also kind of, when you're thinking about things in the context of their specific periodic level, there's gender. It's funny because we get into this and we say we're going to do an entire stream, and I've been saving it because I just know that it's going to be kind of, I don't know. I didn't know. It's just one that I want to be very well prepared for, but I'll make a video and then we'll do a stream about gender and sexual orientation and things like that in terms of how it relates to sentient singularity theory. And there's a lot that, of sense that can be brought to that discussion. And it's in a very simplistic way, that is novel compared to like our current conversations, no matter which, community you're in. And, the idea that these gender is not okay. So like, people will say things like gender is different from sex and all that, and like it's sex is gender within the period, the context of the period of the periodicity of biology. And but gender exists beyond that. Like I said, protons and neutrons are the expression of gender pattern on a hadronic level. And so it's when I first started this, I was like, if a proton is masculine, then an electron is feminine. And I was like, but that doesn't work actually, because I looked at the patterns that were being created in the nucleus, and it was not lining. It wouldn't, when the patterns with the relationships of electrons to protons does not match with the patterns that we see in marriage on a biological level, and it is like or societal level, or even mating on a biological level. There's gray. That's kind of a gray area, and it's. But then I was like, wait, no, the feminine is the neutron. It's not the electron. The electron is different. It's not a composite structure like proton or neutron is, that's made up of quarks. An electron is a fundamental particle, which is really a point. And so it just didn't line up. But then as soon as I put the neutron as basically female on the hadronic level, all of a sudden all the patterns like lined up, and it was like crazy. I could make cross field predictions that actually ended up being pretty consistent. And so it's not wrong to think of that these concepts transcend different levels of existence, but it is important to be like really rigorous in how we try and state them. But it's also really difficult because, like I said, we don't have the language to properly describe a lot of this stuff. We don't, I said this in my video that's linked down below, Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide. I said, we don't have language that is um, accepted across fields that is common to all fields and is also for like basically any kind of new concepts. And you kind of need that for like a fundamental pattern that transcends fields. Like you need new language that, and some of it we do have, like, but it's just become so restricted, probably because of academia. It's not academics' fault. Like, I don't want to sound like I'm just constantly bashing on academics. It's just it is the inevitability of a structure of quote unquote education that is really a memorization. It's like a memorization camp, and I don't say that to be degrading. I mean that to be like, to be descriptive. And when you are that, you're not, um you're prioritizing secondhand information above firsthand information, and you're that means you have to prioritize just like memorization of terms, and those terms are only going to be inherently understood within the context of the other terms that you're taught around them. And but they're no longer going to make sense when you start like branching out into other contexts that are new. So that's why I said maybe we don't say 1 times 1 is equal to 2, even though I kind of understand what he's getting at. I think maybe it's like, and I see it in my own work. It's really, it's this, it's maybe it's like 1 grow 1. So I was trying to think of, like, we have to use terms that really make a lot of like inherent sense. Like we see a lot of people trying to use terms in some ways that are like kind of trying to make up a new word, and sometimes they do a good job and it's really just like exactly what it should be, but a lot of times it's also just not, it's not done coming from the right intentions, which is just to make sense. Like a word, the purpose of a word is to convey an idea to someone else, and so should be as like basic as possible. So when we say what should it be, instead of 1 times 1 or 1 plus 1, what should it be? And I was like, I don't know, 1 grow 1, maybe that's the right term to use. And it sucks because in some ways, like our current mathematical system, even like I said, is, even within Excel, which, I'm using models here that grow, like this didn't start as this. I didn't make a 3x3 grid and start this. I just started with this. And I was like, how do I grow information? And I was like, okay, well, let's think about this. And I basically said, okay, this is equal to this, and this is equal to this, and I was like trying to do it symmetrically, and then I was like, okay, well, this is kind of this plus this, and then I was like, and this is this plus this, and then therefore this would be this plus this, and then I was like, well, then this is either, hold on, let me make this easier, center everything. That means that this is either, this plus this, because remember, I'm trying to be symmetrical, and then this would be like this plus this, and then, this could be this plus this, or it's this, this plus this, or, I basically was just trying to be symmetrical. So, you can see here, there's like many ways to do it. As long as you're doing things symmetrically, you will actually get the same values always, again and again. So like this is now this plus this, and instead of it being this plus this, or this plus this, or this times, this times this, and it's basically symmetrical because it's going straight through the center. There's lots of different ways to do it, but the point is that the values ended up being the same. That's what I realized, which was amazing. So it made me realize I was onto something objective. That 4 is not something I tried to get. It was something that I couldn't help but get. No matter which equation I tried, as long as I was doing it, thinking about things growing symmetrically. And but that's not just multiplication. It's multiplication and addition. I called it replication and stacking at the time. It's like, 1 times 1 is that, or 1 times 2, that's replication. And stacking would be like 1 plus 2. But then it gets tough when you're at that beginning, because it's where you've got 1 and 1, and our mathematics kind of like restricts us into basically putting in a cheat. Even with the Fibonacci sequence, to kick it off, you have to be like adding it to itself to start. And same thing with this. This is like a 2-dimensional Fibonacci sequence. But the point is, I'm growing the structure here as I was making the values. So like, it didn't start as, oh, let's just make a 3 by 3 grid and see like what we can put in there. No, it started with 1, and that was it. And then I was like, okay, well, what can I get from this? It's just 1. Okay, well, now what can I get from this? 2. Okay, well, what can I get from this now? 3. And what can I get from this? The starting point and the finishing point always. Or what can I get from the 2 middle points? And so it's just like, it ended up just being the same no matter what, if you kept it symmetrical. And like I said, I'm not sure I'm doing the best job explaining it. Just kind of wanted to hang out with you guys. Let's see. Hey guys, what's up? What's going on, memes? I dropped out of chemistry with a part of the periodic table, for example. I could understand as the atomic numbers, frequency, and elements. Yeah, I'm not saying I understood what he was saying. Guys, I will be honest with you. Chemistry was the first class I ever failed. I failed actually like a lot of classes, but mostly because I didn't go. I also had some years where I did very well in school, but I also, most of my years I did not try to do well in school. I never did homework, and I ditched a lot. And the first class I ever failed was chemistry, and in high school. So I bet you it would be much easier for me now. But at the time, I just never did my homework, and I didn't care, and I didn't like the teacher, and so I failed. So I'm not going to claim to be the expert on chemistry here, but I can see that there's a common pattern that persists through chemistry and through atoms and molecules and music and colors and math, language, and many other. Yeah, I mean, countless other instances, because coming from us, and also from the mind that we're within. So it's just inevitable. It's these common fundamental structures of information. And it's basically what my theory is, my paper is outlining, is like there's like basically four models, or 8, depending on how you count them. But, and they are the kind of core patterns, or maybe it's 4 patterns, but 8 contexts of these patterns, and that's fundamental and related to the fundamental growth of existence, which is fundamental growth of sentience, and then, because if you've just said the fundamental growth of existence, like, what does that even mean? But you got to break it down. Like, what is existence? What does it mean to exist? Well, I can tell you what it means for you to exist, or what I can tell you what it means for me to exist. It means I am, and I would think that it would be the same exact answer for you, as it would be for anyone, but But that's why it's sentient singularity theory is the theory of everyone. It's more fundamental than even a theory of everything. It's a theory of everyone. It's like you can't. This is what part of why I think even a theory of everything is like such a roundabout concept. It just goes on and on. It's like I'm not saying that people's theories are invalid. I'm just saying like they all seem to be valid. That's the problem. Not all of them, but a lot of them seem to be valid. That is the issue. It's not that none of them seem valid. It's that a lot of them seem valid. But we need one that is a theory of everyone. Well, like if sentience is fundamental, that is even more, and that leads to these theories of everything, or maybe we just call them theories of things. But I guess I almost said theories of all things, but why not just say theory of everything? I don't know. I don't even think that term is like the best, but I understand why it's used. We're basically coming up with these meta theories that are like responsible, that help, that are just showing the patterns that transcend fields, and we're calling them theories of everything. Even when we just think of them as just physics, like string theory or something, it's like, what is a Calabi-Yau manifold? It's probably a structure that occurs at every point in space and time, which means it occurs in many fields. Like it's not just like one, it's not just physics. But yeah. Interesting. 1 grow 1 is equal to 2. Maybe not 1 times 1, but 1 grow 1. And maybe it's not fair to say there's no such thing as 0, but it's fair to say there's no such thing as non-existence. Like, this is what I mean. We need the term that if you change the terms, it's like, okay, maybe Terrence Howard is onto something. I don't know. I mean, it seems like he is. I will say this, like, this is part of one of the, it sucks because I see as somebody, and I say this honestly, so, you know, I do think that I have a talent usually, especially when I've gotten enough sleep, and I've prepared, of describing things that are complicated, that in this like space, in more concisely and than many others. And but I also can see so many people do view something similar out there that they're just really struggling to convey. And because I struggle with it, but like I see it seems to be even more difficult for a lot of people. Maybe Terrence Howard would be one of them. It seems to be. And I hope that we come up with a linguistic framework at some point that allows a lot of these people to all of a sudden be like, yeah, that's what I mean. And then we're not like, you know, accusing them on Twitter of potentially having nervous breakdowns or mental health issues just because they said that, you know, carbon has a bisexual tone or something like that. Maybe they're just trying to describe something that we don't have the words. And yeah, we're definitely in a weird spot with science right now, where our establishment are proving themselves to be very often incompetent. Not always. There's very competent people in academia still, and we've talked about them. Everyone that I've talked about on this channel, I think has like a lot of value to add to the discussion. Even people I really disagree with, like Sean Carroll, on like the most key things. But still a great teacher. But we also are in a place where we're recognizing that our institutions, insofar as that they've been tied in, or that are scientific establishments, insofar as they've been tied into institutions with, you know, kind of corrupted goals potentially, have shown to very often be dishonest with the public, and it's causing like a lot of distrust. And then we're also in this place where like a lot of people have, especially from like the more who speak in a more new age type of way, seem to make a lot of like intuitively they feel like they're making sense, but it also seems like it doesn't matter. And uh and this is it's a weird spot. I'm not saying I know where it goes. I have no idea. But it's been fun to watch and be a part of a little bit. But I will continue. And but yeah, anyways, let's get back to the chat and I'm gonna wrap it up. I hope this was entertaining. Again, like I said, I'm trying. I will say this. I feel sometimes I get off a stream and I'm like, dang, I made progress. Like if you look back at like some of the streams that I've done recently, we talked about like the periodic table of fields. Actually, like by the end of that, I was like, I didn't finish anything, but I definitely feel like we made progress on that working session of kind of outlining the relationships of fields, and I made personal progress in my understanding, and then there were some other streams before that that I thought were pretty good, and then the last couple have definitely been like a lot more disorganized. But I also feel obligated or responsibility to like jump on here and still do a stream every week because I've committed to doing so, and also because I do enjoy it. I enjoy like interacting with the chat and sharing thoughts, but even when they're like this and it's like messy, but yeah, I appreciate everybody's grace. I think that we should have grace for other people too who are struggling to say what they mean, and even if what they mean to say is actually wrong, still that's true for everyone. Better words, yes, we can count. There is no need for new calculators. Terrence Howard is wrong and he doesn't understand arithmetic. I don't know. Maybe it's not arithmetic that we need to, like, I don't know. I'm not claiming to. I'm not going to defend Terrence Howard other than to say in the specifics of what he said. All I did was I showed some things that seem kind of lined up with some things that I've seen too, and some things that other people and some things that other people have seen, and also just say that speaking generally about the idea that like when trying to describe new things with old language, it is very difficult and it's impossible for a lot of people to grasp it. And people will say things like, no, so-and-so is wrong and doesn't understand arithmetic. Maybe he's not trying to actually describe arithmetic. And maybe he's just wrong and he doesn't understand arithmetic. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying we have to realize that when describing something new with old terms, things are going to be messy. 1 + 1 = 2. 1 × 1 = 1. Simple arithmetic, generalized and common for us to share and engage in together. Yes, I agree, actually. 100% I agree with that. And that's why I said maybe we need a new term to describe what I see, at least. Maybe what I see is what he sees, which is that when talking about fundamental reality and the fundamental growth of existence, we need a term that kind of describes this kind of simultaneous action that occurs when a cell divides and adds another. It divides and in order to multiply, and then it adds another to it, and it's like, and it in order to add another, it's subtracting from itself and putting some towards, a new one. It's literally this quadratic simultaneous action, which makes sense. It's very interesting. But it's within that context that we can actually see that there's something happening that we don't have a term in mathematics to describe, because in our mathematics we have multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. So if I said to you, here's an instance about this. If I say to you that my work suggests that on a fundamental level, division and multiplication are the same action viewed from two different perspectives. They're not two different actions. And some math teacher, some high school math teacher is like, no, actually, multiplication is different than division. And they go and they show it on a piece of paper, and yeah, they make perfect sense on that piece of paper. But then I go and I say, well, actually, let's look at this cell. Let's watch it multiply. And we see how it multiplies. How does it multiply? It divides. Seems like that's two perspectives of one action. Not only that, in order to add to a new cell, it has to subtract from its own, material substance. That's adding and subtracting simultaneously. It's one action. And it's the same action as multiplying by dividing. It's the same exact action. And so this is why it's so tough. Is like, I change the context and I make sense too. So there. Like, now what? I'm not saying that you're wrong. You're not. It's not wrong to be like on math. When you're using math as a language and as a tool, and you're like, okay, we're gonna multiply how many apples if we're gonna try and figure out how many apples we have in a box, and we've got 5 going this way, or like not a box but like a tray, and we've got it's 5 by 4, and you say 5 times 4 and you've got 20. Okay, no, we just did that, sure. Or if we want to say, okay, I've got 3 apples, and we're going to add 7 apples to the basket. Now how many apples do we have? We can like say, okay, now we have, what did I say, 3 plus 7, it's 10. So we can do that, and it's correct. But it's also not incorrect to say that a cell multiplies by dividing, and it adds to new cell, and a new cell is added by subtracting from an existing cell. It's like, this is also true, which means that in that context, it's all one action. We're watching it, like we can watch a cell goes like this, and then, okay, we just saw, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division all simultaneously. That's fascinating, right? Can't we, like, there's no way you can deny that. And that means that, like, in that, I get that in that context, it's not, at least currently, like, from just that one, it's just, we're observing these mathematical concepts taking place. We're not using them. Whereas with the apples, we're using them. See what I'm saying? And we can also go and we can, write down an equation that shows the curvature of a structure and some manifold structure or something, and then we're using math as a language at that point to describe a shape. But we can also use math as a tool to calculate the amount of apples that we have in a tray. And we can also observe math. Maybe math isn't the right term, but maybe it is. I don't know. I don't have a better one. But where in that context of fundamental existence growing, which is a cell dividing, or cell, I say it's a cell dividing, oh no, actually it's a cell multiplying, oh no, it's actually a cell adding another cell, oh wait, no, it's a cell subtracting from itself in order to add to that other cell. It's like, all of that's true. That's fascinating. Like, I'm blown away by that, and I've thought about it for years, and I still am blown away by that. That's not something bad to be like feared and be like, no, actually, like, don't change the definition. It's, I don't want to, I'm not, cell is doing what? It's dividing in order to do what? Multiply. By doing what? Subtracting from itself and adding to a new. Like, it's This is what I mean, though. Context is information, not words on their own. Words on their own are just sounds. It's funny, my daughter, bring it back to babies again. My daughter is started consonant sounds this week. So a lot of times she's been like exploring her voice, and well, I'm going to show it because it's funny. But every week she has a new thing. This past week, it's been rolling, onto her stomach from her back. Last week, it was seeing how loud she can scream. And so this is her. Hello, little girl. Did you just discover that you can scream? Want to show everyone? Wow. Wow, baby. That was a big one. Good job. Okay, so now she's added consonant. That's just a lot of like, and then she literally this week started making consonant sounds. She's like, k and g, and like all these things. And this is like right before like first word comes. It's like you've got the vowels. She's got the vowels. She's got the vowels very loud, obviously. Next is consonants. Consonants add context to vowel sounds. K versus g versus s. Like these are all different. We're adding different contexts to the sound, or oo, and or any other vowel sound. And then the context of communication comes in, and so all these words are gonna and sounds that she's making. It's like I'm watching this baby go from this is zero context to, I don't want to say zero context because there's no such thing as zero context, but like minimal context to growing context and growing language and she's not even said the first word yet, not even the first word, but that's going to come soon. I can tell because like all the components are finally there. It starts with screaming and making vowel sounds, then it's consonant sounds, and then it's I say something and I get a reaction, and I say some other sound and I get this reaction, and that is different in contexts. We have had this our entire lives, built every word that we have in our linguistic pocket has been built and stitched into a specific context, and outside of that context it makes no sense. And so I understand when people say things like, oh, that's nonsense. He's saying that carbon has a bisexual tone. That's nonsense, because he's taken words that don't have the context that we don't have the context that he's associating them with, those words with, in order to like formulate what he's trying to say. And I'm not saying that whatever he is trying to say is correct. I'm just saying that he's trying to say something for sure that we don't have the context to even understand whether or not it's right or wrong. Even if it's wrong, we don't have the context to even know. We'd have to go and look at like what he means and have him like explain it much more. And I don't know what he means. But you'd have to like really listen to him. Same thing with me. Even if I say sentient existence is a sentient singularity, it's like you need the context of what that means. And if you have an associative context with the term singularity, that actually leads to a dead end context by saying it's a black hole. Okay, well, what the heck is that? Then and you don't think it's a dead end context because you're trusting the establishment to understand what a black hole is. Like, you're really lost and you don't even know it. But if you're just like, no, singularity, like, what is a singularity? It's like something that is unique and also something that is one unit. Okay, like that we can understand. Like, words, I said on here before, when I first was like really getting into like philosophy, I had this debate till like 2:00 in the morning with Michael Knowles, when I worked at PragerU, and we worked closely with the Daily Wire. Michael Knowles and I went after some event, and we were just like smoking cigars and talking about whether or not language was like the beginning of understanding, and was critical to understanding. And I said no at the time, and now I would say yes and no, but because I was saying that you can understand shape in your mind without actually like being able to express it. But I do think that language allows for like abstraction, but also it's enabled by abstraction. It's like a simultaneous thing, and it is abstraction. Language is abstraction, or it's like I don't even know if that's the right word, but it is. It's the ability to create context for information that is not currently being given context by your physical circumstances. Does that make sense? So, you construct the linguistic world for this concept to live in because it doesn't exist right now. A dog can be like, has a context of its space and what's happening right now, but like is it sitting there and thinking about, I don't know, whether or not multiplying and division is the same, action viewed from two different perspectives? No, because you need kind of that, you need the visual context at least of like the cell, and you also need the linguistic context to like build this environment, this little world for this concept to exist in. And it's really made me realize this whole process, how critical this is. And now it's fascinating to watch like my daughter go through this of like building language from almost nothing. Like it's just like it starts from like just crying when uncomfortable, and then that's it. And that's the only language that they have from the start, and then they just build from that. And but you are part of that context and that process, and it's just fascinating to watch. But we are like this with any new concepts that we're building. We're literally like my daughter. We're like, we have to figure out a new word. It's like but it's even worse because like she's trying to figure out words that already exist, and but we're trying to figure out words for new things. It's like we're like beyond babies when it comes to trying to describe fundamental actions and quote unquote metamathematics, metaphysics, whatever you want to call it. Again, we don't even have a single agreed upon term for this. It's tough. I think Terrence Howard is telling the truth, whether or not he is right or wrong. I mean, I think he's being honest that he's like into this, and that he thinks he's onto something, and I think he is onto something with some of it at least. I can see that he's describing patterns that other people are describing, and some that I see. But there's also a lot of things that he said that I did not understand. But maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. I'm right about a lot of things, and I'm wrong about some things too. That's true for everyone. 1 plus 2 equals 3. It's simple. Yeah, it is. Not like, but it's also simple that, like I said, addition and subtraction are two perspectives of one action in a fundamental context, and that action is also the same action as can be described as division and multiplication at the same time, which is just growth. That's why I said 1 grow 1. Maybe 1 grow 1 is equal to what, 2? Think about it. Like, think about that linguistically. Like, language is an equation, and equations are language. And so I was bad at math because I wasn't good at learning a new language, because you have to do your homework in order. I eventually got good at math in college because I did my homework. But when I was in elementary school, I did not do my homework, so I was bad at math. But it's and I was bad at Spanish because I didn't do my homework. It's the same exact thing, and it's the same subject almost even. Terrence Howard was criticized for saying basically like multiple elements are the same substance, and it's like, Spanish and math are the same thing. So if we think about this, but so is English. Language is language. That's what I'm saying. Or at least math as a language and Spanish as a language are the same thing, and so as also the same thing as English as a language. Any language is language. So when I say an equation like 1 times 1, so like 1 times, or 1 time, it's like 1 times 1 is what? 1. Okay, so 1 time is 1. 1 times 2 is 1 2 times. 1 times 2 is 2. Okay, so makes sense. Then, but if we said 1 grow 1, it's 2. 1 that grows 1. So grows 1 in addition to itself. So it's 1 grow 1 is 2. Instead of 1 times 1 is 2, it's like we should be saying probably something like 1 grow 1 is 2. Like that's much more precise language, if I'm correct about what he's trying to describe. But I am going to say that this is what I'm trying to describe in my work that seems to line up with maybe what he's trying to describe. I don't know, but or when people say 0 doesn't exist or 0 is infinity, it's like, well, okay, people say no, 0 is not infinity. Okay, but if I take all positive numbers and negative numbers and add them together, then what do I get? 0. That's just a trick. It is a trick because the reality is what you're doing is you're trying to use infinity as a number instead of as a concept, and you're putting into and it's also a concept that only really exists on a fundamental level, and you're putting it in a linguistic context, or a practical context, and that doesn't work. So yeah, it does end up kind of being a trick, but it's also not incorrect from within the confines of practical arithmetic. Yeah, I mean, it's but it is interesting that like all these like patterns do translate over. It's like even if 0 is not, we don't call it infinity, it's not the same thing, but it's like when you divide by 0 you do get an error, but like you would kind of also think about that would happen. It's almost like if it is infinity, so if you're like 1 times infinity on your calculator, it would just be like you can't even express it, so it's just an error. And it's interesting that there is that consistency to it, even though I'm not saying it's practical, but to have symbols and terms and words and phrases have multiple meanings. But the reality is that context is key. It is information. You can't actually know what a word means outside of its context. And sometimes if it's a good word, it works. It has a context unto itself. It'd be like singularity. It's like, okay, what does that mean? Not even thinking about physics, just like looking at the word. What does it mean? That has some context built into it. What is, or to say 1 grow 1. It's like, okay, the context is built into our understanding of the word grow. We need new words, man. And but the problem is, as soon as you do new words, people discredit you for it. They're like, "Oh man, you're just making up your own terms," and they'll say that that's like because you can't make sense within like the current paradigm, so you have to make up this new paradigm that nobody can tell whether or not you're actually making sense. It's like, I don't know, maybe some people do that, but like we still need new terms. So A times B is equal to C. 0 and 1 are the only equation. It doesn't work. Speaking of your multiplying and dividing, I'm going through the chat, sorry, got a little lost. Too much book sense, not enough common sense. Yes. What I'm saying is let's not overcomplicate things. I'm not trying to. I'm actually trying to simplify things. Uh, I think you have to be at least 13 to 15 to understand many perspectives when it comes to singularities and other theories. I don't know how old you have to be. What's up? Torn, I don't know what the hand means, but I appreciate it. What's his 1 times 1 equals 1 argument? Is that basically we have to calculate things volumetrically, I think is what he said. I'm not exactly sure. I need to go back and look at the clip. And honestly, I don't really want to play any more clips. Because it's late. But I will, we can talk more about it at some point. But I also don't want to talk about him too much. Like I do know that I like talk about other people's conversations on here, and like there's multiple, it's like a way of injecting myself into the discussion when it's not easy or possible to do so otherwise. But it's all, people make papers that respond to other people's papers and whatever. That's basically what I'm trying to do. But I don't try and talk about like people too much, even though I obviously talk about discussions between people quite a bit. But like, but I don't want to like get into too many clips because I also didn't understand everything that he was saying. There were just key little things I could pick out. But basically, he was just saying that it seems like he's saying the same thing that I am, is like there's this weird fundamental level where like, outside of practical mathematics where there's like negative numbers and stuff like that, where it's just there's no zero or there's, which means there's no non-existence, and there's that means almost like there's no way for a positive mathematical action to be expressed without it actually adding another. This is my argument for why 1 times 1 could be on a fundamental level could be interpreted to mean like 2. But it really, like what I'm saying though is we need to change the term to like 1 grow 1, not 1 times 1, because it's going to get confusing. But it's on a fundamental level, because there's no zero, there's no empty set, there's no absence, any positive action will lead to growth of information, and growth of information from 1 is going to be more than 1. So trying guys, like I said, it's tough. You don't have to use old words, but yeah, I think your theory or ideas are way better than Howard. Dude is famous, so he gets attention, but I like your work much more, Tyler. I appreciate that. I put a lot of effort into it, and I don't know what his theory is, so I can't comment on it, but I don't. Yeah, I mean, it is just it's interesting how much this is like going everywhere. And I saw like, I don't know. It's just I saw a lot of criticism that I thought was not the right criticism. It's not constructive. I'm trying to be constructive. And especially myself, like with this, is like I need to get the language right. I can't just tell other people to get the language right. So anyways, we can't even say what the theory is. Yeah, I don't know if he even has one though. I mean, I used to not say I had a theory, but there was a reason why sentient singularity theory needed a name. It wasn't because I wanted it to have one. It was like I had epiphany of like, oh, actually, I need to give it a name. It's not just work that I can add to somebody else's work. Nobody else's theory had a name that so concisely described the essential nature and the foundational structure of existence so concisely, which it needs to do. You know, but there are some that have now gotten close. Observer theory from Stephen Wolfram. But guess what observer theory sounds like? It sounds like sentient singularity. Like, it does. What is a sentient singularity? It's an observer. That's what it is. And but my name was first. but I like the observer theory. I like that term. So I'm not trying to take away from it. I like that Wolfram came up with that. I think that's exactly the right path. So hats off. But yeah, you need, like, the words matter. Yeah, it must be something about it that rings true. Yep, exactly. But anyways, I'm gonna call it, guys. I appreciate you guys joining me, and please hit the like button. Please share this if you found it entertaining. It was I don't know what it was. I'll leave that to you guys to decide whether or not this was valuable or not. But if you thought it was, let me know in the comments below and share it and like it. It does help quite a bit. But yeah, main takeaway: we need a new linguistic framework to make any real progress on fundamental science. So with that, peace, and I will talk to you guys later.